The desert wind carried dust across the abandoned checkpoint as Commander Harris studied the intelligence reports spread across his makeshift table. 3 weeks had passed since the enemy had taken control of the mountain pass, cutting off vital supply routes to the city below. Every attempt to retake the position had failed. Snipers positioned in the rocky terrain had picked off his men one by one, making any advance impossible. "Sir, we have a visitor," Sergeant Mills announced, stepping into the command tent with uncertainty in his voice. Harris looked up from his maps, expecting to see another officer or perhaps a local informant. Instead, a woman stood in the tent opening. She wore simple desert clothing that had seen better days, with a worn scarf wrapped around her head. What struck him most was her complete silence, and the way she carried herself with an almost ghostly presence. The woman appeared to be in her 30s, though the harsh sun had weathered her face in a way that made it difficult to tell. Her eyes were the most striking feature, dark and intense. They seemed to hold secrets that would never be spoken. She carried no identification, no weapons that were visible, and when Mills had tried to question her, she had simply pointed toward the enemy position and then to herself. "She won't speak, sir," Mills explained. "The patrol found her walking across the desert toward our lines. No supplies, no vehicle tracks, nothing. It's like she appeared from nowhere." Harris studied the woman carefully. In 20 years of military service, he had seen all kinds of people, but something about this one was different. There was a calmness about her that seemed unnatural given the dangerous situation. Most civilians who wandered into war zones were either terrified or confused. This woman showed neither emotion. "Do you understand English?" Harris asked. The woman nodded once, a simple movement that somehow conveyed more than words could express. "Are you looking for help? Food? Water?" She shook her head and again pointed toward the mountain pass where the enemy snipers had been causing so much trouble. Then she made a gesture with her hands, bringing them together as if holding something, and closed one eye while pointing with her finger. The meaning was unmistakable. "You're saying you can deal with the snipers?" Harris asked, disbelief clear in his voice. Another nod, this one more firm and confident. Sergeant Mills shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, with respect, she's just a civilian. We can't send her into a combat zone." But Harris was thinking about the reports on his desk. 17 good soldiers lost in 3 weeks. Ammunition running low. The brass demanding results. Traditional tactics had failed completely against the enemy position. Maybe it was time to consider unconventional options. "Show me," Harris said finally. The woman walked to his table and studied the maps with the trained eye of someone who understood military strategy. She traced the mountain paths with her finger, identifying positions that Harris's scouts had marked as sniper nests. Her finger moved with precision, stopping at each confirmed enemy location. Then, she did something that surprised everyone in the tent. She picked up a pencil and marked 3 additional spots on the map, places where no intelligence suggested enemy presence. When she finished, she looked up at Harris with those intense dark eyes and nodded once more. "You're saying there are snipers here too?" Harris asked, pointing to her marks. She nodded and held up her hand, showing 5 fingers, then pointed to all the marked positions. 5 snipers total, not the 2 that intelligence had suggested. The tent fell silent. If she was right about the additional positions, it would explain why every assault had failed so catastrophically. The enemy had been using hidden shooters to create killing fields that his men couldn't see or predict. "How could you know this?" Harris asked. For the first time, the woman's expression changed slightly. A shadow passed across her face, suggesting memories that were painful to recall. She touched her temple briefly, then made the shooting gesture again. Mills stepped forward. "Sir, even if she's right about the positions, we can't just send an unarmed civilian against trained military snipers." The woman reached into her worn jacket and withdrew something that made both soldiers step back in surprise. It was a scope, not just any scope, but a precision instrument that belonged to a high-end sniper rifle. The glass was clean despite the dust that covered everything else, and the mechanisms moved with the smoothness of equipment that had been maintained with expert care. "Where's the rifle?" Harris asked. She pointed toward the desert, then made a digging motion with her hands. Somewhere out in that vast wasteland, she had buried her weapon. Harris studied her face again, looking for any sign of deception or madness. What he saw instead was the steady gaze of someone who had made this offer before, in other places, against other enemies. This was not a desperate civilian. This was a professional. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman touched her throat and shook her head. Either she couldn't speak, or she had chosen not to. Then, she did something unexpected. She pulled out a small, worn photograph from her pocket and placed it on the table. The image showed a burning village. Bodies lay in the dirt streets, and smoke rose from destroyed homes. In the foreground, a young girl clutched a doll while standing next to what appeared to be her dead parents. Harris picked up the photograph and studied it more carefully. The destruction was systematic, professional. This was not the random violence of warfare, but the calculated elimination of civilians. The kind of work done by snipers who took pride in their ability to kill from a distance. "This is why you're here," Harris said. It was not a question. The woman nodded and pointed to herself in the photograph. She had been the little girl with the doll. Everything that had happened since that day had led her to this moment, to this chance for justice. Mills cleared his throat. "Sir, we still don't know anything about her capabilities. She could be walking into a suicide mission." The woman heard this and smiled for the first time since entering the tent. It was not a happy expression, but rather the smile of someone who had already died in every way that mattered. Physical death held no fear for her. She walked to the tent entrance and pointed toward a flagpole about 300 meters away. A small flag fluttered in the desert breeze. Then, she held up one finger and mouthed the word "watch." Before anyone could stop her, she stepped outside. Harris and Mills followed, along with several other soldiers who had been curious about the strange visitor. The woman walked about 50 meters from the tent, knelt in the sand, and made a precise throwing motion. A small stone flew through the air in a perfect arc. It struck the flagpole with a sharp ping that could be heard clearly across the distance. The flag stopped fluttering for a moment as the pole vibrated from the impact. "Impressive throw, but not exactly sniper precision," Mills muttered. The woman overheard and held up her hand for patience. She picked up another stone, took careful aim, and threw again. This time the stone struck the rope holding the flag to the pole. The flag fell to the ground, leaving only the thin rope visible against the sky. Harris felt a chill run down his spine. The precision required for that throw was extraordinary. If she could do that with a stone, what could she accomplish with a rifle? The woman walked back to them and pointed again toward the mountain pass. Her message was clear: give her a chance, and the sniper problem would be solved. "Even if you can do what you're suggesting," Harris said, "it's a suicide mission. 5 enemy snipers in fortified positions. You'd be outnumbered and outgunned." The woman shook her head and held up one finger. "Not 5 targets. 1 mission. She would handle them all, but, in her own way, using methods that conventional soldiers could not understand or execute." Harris looked at his maps again, thinking about the men he had lost and the mission that was failing. Traditional military tactics had proven useless against an enemy that could kill from concealment. Maybe it was time to fight fire with fire. "If I agree to this," he said, "what do you need from us?" The woman pointed to the map and traced a route that led around the mountain rather than through the main pass. She needed them to create a distraction, something that would draw the enemy's attention while she moved into position. Nothing elaborate or dangerous, just enough noise and movement to keep the snipers focused on the obvious threat while the real danger approached unseen. She also held up her hand and made a circular motion, indicating that she would need time. This was not going to be a quick operation, but a careful campaign that might take days to complete properly. "How will we know when it's done?" Harris asked. The woman pointed to the sky and made a downward motion with her hand. When the threat was eliminated, the signs would be unmistakable. Harris made his decision. "Sergeant Mills, prepare a reconnaissance patrol for tomorrow morning. Make it visible, but keep them at safe distance. And give me a communication setup so we can coordinate timing." The woman nodded her approval and walked back toward the desert. She paused at the edge of the camp and turned back once, making a gesture that was almost like a salute. Then, she disappeared into the darkness as silently as she had arrived. "Sir," Mills said quietly, "are you sure about this?" Harris folded the map and looked toward the mountain pass where his men had died. Sergeant, nothing about this war has been sure. But sometimes you have to trust in things you can't fully understand. As the night deepened, soldiers on guard duty reported seeing a figure moving through the desert, always at the edge of vision, heading toward the mountains where death waited in concealment. By morning, she was gone, and the real mission was about to begin. The woman moved through the rocky terrain like a shadow that had learned to breathe. 3 days had passed since she left the military camp, and she had spent every hour studying her targets from a distance. The enemy snipers were skilled, but they had grown comfortable in their positions. Comfort was a weakness she intended to exploit. Her buried rifle had been exactly where she left it, wrapped in protective cloth and hidden beneath a cairn of stones that looked natural to any passing observer. The weapon was a custom piece, built from components she had collected over years of careful hunting. During the water break, he turned his head slightly to the left, presenting the smallest possible target window. She had found her shooting position on a ridge 800 meters away. It was not the closest option, but it offered the best combination of concealment and escape routes. The shot would have to be perfect because there would be no second chance. As dawn broke on the 4th day, the woman settled into position and began her breathing exercises. The familiar weight of the rifle felt like greeting an old friend. Her finger found the trigger with the unconscious precision of someone who had done this countless times before. At exactly 0647 hours, the enemy sniper began his routine scan of the road. The woman adjusted for wind and elevation, her calculations automatic after years of practice. The crosshairs settled on the precise spot where his head would be during the water break. The minutes passed with agonizing slowness. She controlled her breathing, keeping her heart rate steady. The scope never wavered from its target point. When the enemy sniper reached for his water bottle, the woman exhaled halfway and gently squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the mountains like thunder. 800 meters away, the first sniper slumped forward in his position, never knowing what had killed him. Before the echo faded, the woman was already moving. She broke down her rifle with practiced speed and began working her way toward the second position. The other snipers would have heard the shot, but they would not immediately understand what it meant. She had perhaps 20 minutes before they realized one of their team was dead. The second sniper nest was hidden among a cluster of boulders on a different peak. This shooter covered the northern approach to the pass and was known for his patience. According to the intelligence she had gathered, he could remain motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect target. But patience could also be a trap. The woman had noticed that this sniper had a habit of repositioning every few hours to avoid stiffness in his joints. During these movements, he was briefly vulnerable. She reached her chosen observation point just as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Through her scope, she could see the sniper's position clearly. He was alert now, probably wondering about the gunshot he had heard earlier. His radio would be crackling with questions, but there would be no answers from the first position. The woman settled into wait. This part of her work required a different kind of skill than marksmanship. She had to think like her target, to understand his fears and anticipate his reactions. Fear made people predictable, and predictable people died. For 2 hours, nothing happened. The enemy sniper remained in his position, scanning the approaches below. But as the sun climbed higher, the woman saw what she had been waiting for. The sniper began to shift uncomfortably in the heat. His position was well chosen for concealment, but poor for comfort as the day grew warmer. At 1034 hours, he began his repositioning movement. It was a careful process. He did not want to expose himself unnecessarily. But there was a moment, perhaps 3 seconds long, when he had to move from the shelter of one boulder to another. The woman had positioned herself to cover that exact gap. When the enemy sniper made his move, she was ready. The second shot was even cleaner than the first. The man dropped without a sound, his rifle clattering against the rocks. 2 down, 3 to go. But now the surviving snipers knew they were being hunted. Their radio chatter would be frantic, and they would be scanning every possible position where a counter-sniper might hide. The easy kills were over. The woman moved again, this time working her way around to the eastern side of the pass. The third sniper position was the most challenging. It was built into a cave that provided excellent protection from return fire. The shooter there covered the supply road and had accounted for more casualties than any of the others. As she climbed through the rocky terrain, the woman's mind drifted to the photograph she carried. The little girl in that image had died the day her parents were murdered. What remained was something harder and more focused, a weapon that had learned to think and feel, but only in service of one goal. She had spent years tracking the men responsible for that massacre. Some had died in distant cities, never knowing why death had come for them. Others had realized what was happening in their final moments and had tried to beg or bargain. None of it had brought her parents back, but it had taught her that justice was something you had to take for yourself. The third position required a different approach. A direct shot was impossible due to the cave's protection, but the woman had noticed something during her reconnaissance. The sniper's field of fire was limited by the cave opening, which meant he had blind spots on either side of his position. If she could get close enough, she could force him to abandon his protected position. But it would mean exposing herself to his fire while she maneuvered into range. The woman studied the terrain and formulated her plan. There was a dried stream bed that ran along the base of the cliff where the cave was located. If she could reach it unseen, she could work her way to within 50 meters of the position. From there, she could force the engagement on her terms. The approach took 3 hours of careful movement. Every step had to be planned to avoid detection. The enemy sniper was alert now, sweeping his scope across every possible avenue of approach. The woman moved only when she was certain she was in his blind spots, freezing completely whenever she felt exposed. When she finally reached the stream bed, the woman prepared for the most dangerous part of her plan. She would have to reveal herself deliberately to draw the sniper out of his cave. It would be a test of speed and accuracy with her life as the stakes. She assembled her rifle in the shelter of a boulder and checked her ammunition. Then, she selected a piece of equipment she had not used yet, a small mirror that could reflect sunlight. Sometimes the best way to flush a hidden enemy was to make him think he had found you in the wrong place. The woman positioned the mirror to catch the afternoon sun and aimed the reflection at a spot about 30 meters from her actual position. To the sniper in the cave, it would look like the glint of an optical scope. He would focus on that location and move to get a better shot. The plan worked perfectly. Within minutes, she saw movement in the cave mouth as the enemy sniper shifted position to engage what he thought was his hunter. The moment he moved into the open, the woman had her shot. The third enemy sniper fell at the entrance to his cave, his rifle spinning away down the cliff face. 3 down, 2 remaining. But as the woman prepared to move toward the fourth position, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Helicopter rotors echoing off the canyon walls. The enemy was bringing in reinforcements. She watched through her scope as 2 military helicopters swept over the pass. They were conducting a search pattern, looking for whoever was eliminating their snipers. The aircraft carried door gunners and would make her job much more difficult. The woman realized her mission had just become exponentially more dangerous. She was no longer hunting stationary targets in fixed positions. Now she was being hunted in return by an enemy with air support and superior firepower. She quickly broke down her rifle and sought better concealment among the rocks. The helicopters made 2 complete sweeps of the area, their crews scanning every shadow and crevice. One aircraft passed so close that she could see the door gunner's face beneath his helmet. When the helicopters moved on to search other areas, the woman knew she had perhaps an hour before they returned. The 4th and 5th snipers would be relocating their positions, using the air cover to find better defensive positions. Her advantage of knowing their locations was gone. But the woman had faced worse odds before. In the burning ruins of her childhood village, she had hidden for 3 days while enemy soldiers searched for survivors. She had learned that survival was not about having superior firepower, but about being smarter, more patient, and more determined than your enemies. The 4th sniper had been positioned on a platform built into a tree that overhung the supply road. It was an excellent position for interdicting convoys, but poor for all-around defense. The woman worked her way through the forest below, moving tree to tree in a careful approach. When she reached the base of the sniper's tree, she discovered that he had already relocated. The platform was empty, with only some spent brass casings to show it had ever been occupied. For a moment, the woman felt the cold touch of uncertainty. Her targets were adapting, becoming unpredictable. The hunt was entering a new phase where the roles of predator and prey might shift at any moment. Then, she heard it, the soft scrape of metal on wood somewhere above her. The sniper had not abandoned his tree entirely, but had moved to a different position higher up. He was waiting for her to reveal herself, thinking he had the advantage of elevation and concealment. The woman smiled grimly and began to climb. The enemy sniper expected to hunt ground targets, not someone who could come at him from an unexpected direction. As she climbed through the branches, she could hear him moving above, trying to track targets on the ground below. When she finally saw him, he was focused intently on his scope, scanning the road for signs of movement. The woman raised her rifle and took careful aim. At this range, there was no room for error. The fourth shot rang out through the forest, and another enemy sniper fell from his perch to crash through the branches below. 4 down, 1 to go. But, as the woman climbed down from the tree, she heard the helicopters returning. This time they were not searching but heading directly toward her position. Someone had spotted the muzzle flash of her last shot. The final phase of her mission would be the most dangerous yet. The helicopters thundered overhead as the woman pressed herself against the rocky cliff face. Dust and debris swirled around her as the aircraft circled like mechanical vultures. She counted at least 12 soldiers rappelling down from the helicopters, their boots hitting the ground with purpose and training that spoke of elite units. The last enemy sniper was no longer her primary concern. The new arrivals were equipped with thermal imaging and night vision gear. They moved with the coordination of a team that had hunted human targets before. The woman realized she was facing special forces operators, not regular infantry. She had perhaps 10 minutes before their search pattern reached her current position. The weapon that had served her so well was now a liability. The long rifle would be impossible to maneuver in close combat. She quickly broke it down and concealed the components in different caches among the rocks. If she survived, she could retrieve them later. From her remaining gear, she selected items better suited for what was coming next. A compact pistol with a suppressor, a knife that had tasted blood before, smoke grenades that could provide concealment when she needed to move. This was no longer a sniper mission but an escape and evasion scenario. The woman studied the terrain below through a small pair of binoculars. The Special Forces team was conducting a methodical sweep, moving in formations designed to prevent anyone from slipping through their net. But she noticed something that gave her hope. They were searching for a conventional sniper who would try to maintain distance and elevation advantage. They were not looking for someone who would come at them from below. There was a series of natural caves in the cliff face about 50 meters below her current position. If she could reach them unseen, she might be able to work her way around behind the search teams. The approach would require free climbing down an exposed rock face, but it was her best option. As she prepared to descend, movement caught her eye. The fifth sniper had finally revealed himself, and his new position was even more dangerous than she had expected. He had set up in an elevated hide that overlooked not just the pass, but also the area where the Special Forces team was searching. He could pick off his own allies if they got too close to his target. The woman realized what was happening. The fifth sniper was not just trying to eliminate her. He was using the search team as bait to flush her into the open. Once she revealed herself to evade the ground forces, he would have a clear shot from his overwatch position. It was a clever trap, but the sniper had made one crucial error. His elevated position, while perfect for observing the search area, left him exposed to anyone who could approach from the higher peaks. The same pride in his marksmanship that made him effective also made him predictable. The woman changed her plan. Instead of fleeing from the Special Forces team, she would use them as cover to reach the fifth sniper's position. It would require her to move through the middle of the search area, but sometimes the most dangerous path was also the safest. She began her descent toward the caves, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to climb before she could properly walk. The burning village of her childhood had been in mountain country, and the survivors had hidden in caves very much like these. Every handhold and footstep brought back memories she had spent years trying to forget. Halfway down the cliff face, she heard shouts from below. One of the search teams had found where she had cached part of her rifle. The soldiers were excited, thinking they were closing in on their target. The woman used their distraction to complete her descent and slip into the cave system. The caves were larger than they appeared from outside, with passages that connected different cliff faces. The woman had explored similar formations as a child, playing games that became deadly serious when real soldiers came hunting for mountain people. She moved through the darkness using skills learned in a time when being found meant death. From a cave opening on the opposite side of the cliff, she could observe the fifth sniper's position. He was exactly where she had expected, focused intently on the search teams below. His rifle was a precision instrument capable of killing at extreme range, and his position dominated the entire valley. But he had positioned himself on a narrow ledge with no easy escape route. The same isolation that gave him a perfect field of fire also trapped him if someone could get close enough. The woman began working out a route that would allow her to approach his position from behind. The climb would take her along a series of ledges barely wide enough for one person. There were no safety ropes or protection. A single mistake would mean a fall that would kill her before she hit the ground. But she had made similar climbs before, driven by the same cold determination that had brought her to this mountain. As she began the traverse, the woman heard gunfire echoing from below. The Special Forces team had encountered resistance from another source. Apparently, some of the enemy's regular forces were still operating in the area. The sound of automatic weapons and grenades created a chaos that would help mask any noise she might make during her approach. The ledge traverse took 40 minutes of careful movement. Her hands cramped from gripping the rough rock, and her legs shook with fatigue by the time she reached the sniper's vicinity. But when she finally peered around the rock formation that concealed his position, she could see him clearly. He was a professional, that much was obvious. His equipment was maintained to perfection, and his discipline was evident in how he controlled his breathing and managed his position. But professionalism was not the same as instinct, and instinct was what kept people alive when the rules changed. The woman drew her suppressed pistol and considered her options. A shot from this range would be difficult, but not impossible. However, any gunfire might alert the Special Forces teams below, and she still needed to extract from the area. A quieter approach would be better. She holstered the pistol and drew her knife. The blade was a tool that had served her well in the dark alleys of foreign cities where the men from her village's destruction had tried to hide. It made no sound when properly used, and it left no doubt about the user's intentions. Moving closer required crossing 10 meters of open ledge where the sniper might see her if he turned around. The woman waited for the right moment, watching his scanning pattern and the rhythm of his movements. When automatic weapons fire erupted from the valley below, she made her move. The sound of her footsteps on stone was lost in the echo of gunfire from below. The sniper remained focused on his scope, searching for targets among the chaos in the valley. The woman crossed the exposed ground like a shadow that had learned patience from watching death work. When she was close enough to smell the gun oil on his rifle, the sniper finally sensed something wrong. He began to turn, his hand moving toward a sidearm holstered at his hip. But he was already too late. The woman's knife found the precise spot between his ribs that would reach his heart. He died quickly and quietly, his finger never reaching the trigger that might have alerted his allies. The fifth and final sniper slumped forward over his rifle, his mission ending with the soft sound of steel parting flesh. 5 down. The mission was complete. But extraction was another problem entirely. The Special Forces teams were still conducting their search, and the helicopters circled overhead like mechanical birds of prey. The woman realized she would have to remain hidden until nightfall, then make her way out of the mountains under cover of darkness. She dragged the sniper's body away from the rifle and took his position behind the scope. Through the powerful optic, she could observe the search teams clearly. They were professional and thorough, but they were looking for someone who was no longer there. The woman they hunted had completed her transformation from the child in the photograph to something altogether more dangerous. As the hours passed, she watched the soldiers below gradually realize they were searching for ghosts. Their quarry had vanished like smoke, leaving behind only empty positions and dead comrades. The helicopters expanded their search pattern, moving farther from the mountain pass with each sweep. When darkness finally fell, The woman began her journey back toward the military camp where Commander Harris waited. She moved through the night like a spirit returning to the world of the living, her mission complete, but her soul unchanged by the completion. The desert wind carried her footsteps away as she walked across the sand toward the distant lights of the base. Behind her, the mountain pass lay silent for the first time in weeks. The road was open, and the supply convoys could resume their vital mission. Commander Harris was waiting by the communications tent when she emerged from the darkness. He looked older than he had a week ago, wearing the expression of a man who had learned not to ask too many questions about victories that came with no explanation. "Is it done?" he asked. The woman nodded once and placed something on the table between them. It was the scope from her rifle, the instrument that had served as both judge and executioner in the mountains above. The glass was clean despite the dust and violence it had witnessed. Harris picked up the scope and studied it in the lamplight. When he looked up, the woman was already walking away, disappearing back into the desert from which she had emerged. "Wait," he called after her. "What should I put in my report? What name should I use?" The woman paused at the edge of the light and turned back one final time. For a moment, Harris thought she might finally speak, might offer some explanation for what had happened in the mountains. Instead, she touched the photograph in her pocket, the image of a burning village and a little girl who had learned that justice was something you had to take for yourself. Then, she was gone, swallowed by the darkness as completely as if she had never existed at all. Harris stood alone in the circle of lamplight, holding the scope and wondering if he would ever understand what he had witnessed. In the morning, supply convoys began moving through the pass without incident. The mountain positions that had claimed so many lives stood empty, their occupants gone without explanation. The official reports would speak of a successful operation conducted by classified assets, but the truth was simpler and more mysterious. Sometimes justice came in the form of a woman with no name and no past, who carried death in her hands and mercy nowhere in her heart. The child in the photograph had finally found peace, not through forgiveness or understanding, but through the absolute completion of a promise made in the ashes of everything she had loved. The desert wind continued to blow across the empty checkpoint, carrying dust and secrets in equal measure. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, a woman walked alone toward whatever destination called to those who had finished their appointed tasks. The rifle scope remained behind. Its purpose served, reflecting the last light of day like the closed eye of something that no longer needed to see. The mission was complete. The story was finished. The silence that followed was deeper and more final than any words could express.